There's this saying, be kind, because everyone is fighting a battle you know nothing about. You never know what someone is going through, right? I was reminded about how important this is on a recent trip to Raleigh, North Carolina. I was in the airport waiting for my flight back to LA, as you do, and I saw this man sitting a little ways away in another terminal and waiting like me. Give me that look, that hello nod. You know what I mean, right? He gets up, walks over to me, and I'm thinking, okay, do I know this guy? But he didn't look familiar. As he came up to me, he asked, "Are you Bryan Elliott?" And with all the enthusiasm my introverted self could muster, I quietly said yes, and he proceeded to tell me that he's a big fan of the podcast and how much it means to him. I was really flattered and also kind of stunned, like a deer in the headlights, because I don't get approached like this very much, but it was really nice. To be honest, the week prior leading up to this trip, I was really struggling with feeling like I'm not doing enough and falling short of some of my goals, but that all completely disappeared with this man's simple act of kindness. Since then, it's reminded me again about being grateful for what I've got and staying focused on things I can control and not on things I cannot. If he's listening right now, I'd like to apologize for being so awkward and also thank him for making my day a lot brighter. You were headed from Raleigh-Durham to Arizona and the Grand Canyon with your family, so I hope you had a fantastic trip. I'd like to keep meeting more of you. This was awesome. Can we keep this up? If you see me out and about, please say hello. I would love a chance to meet you and hear about what you're up to. One thing you may not know about being a creator, and I'm sure this applies to everything, whether you're a creator of music, film, a podcast, or make some sort of product or service for people every day, it's hard to know exactly who's paying attention or the impact. But when we do get to meet, it's an incredible feeling to know that what we're doing really matters, at least a little bit, to someone else. Anyway, let's get into this podcast with Bill Harper. I know you're going to love it. We talk about all things brand. Let's go.
The number one thing that I can say is it's not about you. These are the four most important words in business. It's not about you. It never was. It never will be. You've got to understand why the person that's sitting in front of you bothered to sit in front of you. And the more you understand their situation and how you can change their emotional state for the better, the more value you're going to have to that audience group. And so few businesses really understand that. And that's why they're so hooked on innovation and pricing and promotions. So don't go down the path. Actually take the time to learn the audience. Don't make assumptions about it, and build everything that you're doing off of getting to know them and why.
This episode is brought to you by WeWork. Don't just work from anywhere. Your working week deserves a little luxury, like beautiful spaces to spark ideas in person, designed carefully for collaboration, and peaceful nooks with focus mode and awesome Wi-Fi. I love WeWork because I'm surrounded by like-minded people. It's a great place to hang out, network, or make good friends. They're even dog-friendly. Whether you're a solo entrepreneur or you bring your entire team, yes, your entire team, there's a place and a space for you at WeWork. Are you inspired by where you work? Check out WeWork, because now you can unlock productive, flexible workspaces in over 180 locations near you, especially if you use the WeWork All Access Basic. Get 30% off your first 5 months by using code BRYAN, AA30, that's BRYAN, AA30, or to redeem the offer, just go to we.co/behind the brand. This episode is brought to you by my brand new, absolutely free VIP list. Want to get a short note from me each week with what I've learned from interviewing some of the smartest people in the world, the best inspiration, education, access to my private events, special perks, unique finds, free stuff, and a lot more to help you improve your life and business? Get on the list. Just go to behindthebrand.tv/VIP. It's an email newsletter. It's as easy as that. 123 VIP. behindthebrand.tv/VIP, and get on the list.
Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Harper. I'm the founder and chief creative officer of Brand Boss HQ and WMH. And this is Behind the Brand with Bryan Elliott.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of the show. Bill, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate being here.
It's great to have you on. I know you're in Raleigh, Durham.
Mm-hmm. Rainy Raleigh today.
Well, I usually ask my guests, how did you get this job? Um, I want people to have some context on your background. So, how did you get this job?
Well, this particular job I made, but with respect to how did I get here, I actually started off wanting to design cars. I thought I was going to be a mechanical engineer, so I came out of high school with an interest in theater, writing, art, and engineering electronics. And so I went to college initially thinking that I was going to go follow in the steps of Pininfarina and Ferdinand Porsche and the rest of them, and very quickly ran headlong into calculus, which did not agree with me at all, and realized the limitations of my own thing. But along the way, what I found was that there was an opportunity to bring all of those interests together in a business environment where I got to be creative and I got to do presentations and I got to help with structure and I got to help with financial thing and the whole 9 yards, and that thing was called advertising. And so it wasn't a part of the vocabulary when I was initially coming out. I sort of stumbled into it. And once I found it, there was no turning back. I just fell madly in love with it. And I've been that way ever since.
I had no idea that you're a car guy.
Oh, I think a buddy of mine said it best when he said, your wife will never have to worry about you cheating, but your car, you're going to cheat on it every day. There's way too many cars and way too little time.
Let's stay on. I'm a car guy too. So I don't wrench on my car. I don't even change my own oil. There's lots of reasons behind that. It's a sort of a cost benefit thing. Like I could spend an hour, maybe 3 hours changing my own oil, but it's like, I'd rather just have it done, either at the dealership or by my trusted mechanic, pay him $50 or whatever. And that's my time, better spent doing other things. But I love the design of cars. I love the branding of cars. And for those who've watched this channel on YouTube, we're sort of recording 2-for-1, an audio podcast and video podcast, but like they've seen me drive the Maserati MC20 recently, the Lamborghini Urus, the McLaren 650S Spider, the Porsche 911 Carrera. Let's see what other cars. I mean, through the years, I've gotten a chance to sort of review and talk about lots of different cars on this channel, but also, I've had my experience with cars. Let's talk about cars for a second. What's your dream car?
Oh, yes. See, that's the problem. I mean, you could go historically with something like a Cobra, then there's the 356, then, so that's like old timer 69 Camaro. Oh, just absolutely love that.
So you're an American muscle car guy. Okay.
No. That's the thing is I'm actually a German car guy and an Italian car guy. So Ferrari F8 Spider is the one that's on the list currently, but I absolutely loved my Boxster when I had it. And there's a 911 that I'm madly in love with that I'm looking at right now that I'd like to purchase. So along the way, 2 or 3 Audis. I did a brief stint I am a guy that likes to wrench on my cars. And so I owned 7 RX-7s and sort of tooled around and raced them for a while, and found a guy when I was in college that was all he did, and basically like lived at his house, and we like rebuilt RX-7s together every summer break that I had. It was a lot of fun.
So the RX-7, as I remember, it's that funky engine type, right? It's like you're not your standard.
Yeah, the Wankel rotary engine, right? Yeah, there's an amazing history behind that engine and how it works. And just from an engineering standpoint, you could geek out on that forever. No top end, no valve stems, no valve train, none of that. Everything is backwards. So if you want the car to go faster, you have to remove things from the backside. So unlike on the front end where you're typically trying to increase volume of air into, turbos and all the rest of it, in this case, because there's no valve stem in the way, you're trying instead to remove impediments from behind. So you're trying to get rid of, glass backs are a good choice, or anything that'll stop the impeding of exhaust is a good thing. It's a lot of fun. They're great cars.
That's awesome. And that whole Japanese genre too is so hot. My next door neighbor, coincidentally, this week picked up a like vintage, and it still has a Japanese license plate on it. 240Z. It's the coolest car. Yeah, so cool. And
You can do anything with them too. Those cars were bulletproof. I mean, you could just do anything with them.
yeah, I love Japanese cars too. So, I got to work a little bit over in Japan, and I got the chance to go over to Tochigi. And Tochigi is where the Honda R&D factory is. Years ago, they ran these ad spots, Honda did, about the whole, Honda process. And they showed like the crash test dummies, and they did like, like the sort of like this innovation story about Honda. You remember that campaign? It was, and anyway, so I went to that facility, because I got to work with Honda a little bit on a consulting project, and I got to tour that factory and see. It's where I think they make the engine basically, and it's also where they were doing their F1 Formula One stuff. Super cool place. But
Doing an automotive tour around Germany is definitely on the bucket list. But talking about those cars in particular, I really miss, from a brand standpoint, since we're kind of talking about behind the brand, I miss the Mazda Nissan thing. Like, I miss the 300Z versus RX-7. I don't know what Mazda was thinking with the RX-8. I mean, to go from the 93 to 95 production model RX-7, which was such a badass car. I got to drive that car when it was still new, and it was lightning fast, and it was amazing, and it was a 300Z killer, and everybody was like oohing and ahhing. And then, all of a sudden it disappeared. And, we went to, Zoom Zoom, and like, I just don't get, like, how could you go from, the two of them chewing up the road at each other? It was kind of like the BMW Audi fight, it was like, here are these two cars that were incredibly evenly matched. And in this case, they had a completely different, engine drivetrain. So there was this real point of difference between the two. And both brands just sort of like let it go. I don't know. So there's not a lot of reason to have faith in either brand at the moment. They became sort of milquetoast.
yeah, a lot happened, right, with that whole Japanese market. I remember, and I think a lot of it has to do with the leadership. You had this very controversial figure, Carlos Ghosn, kind of at the head of Nissan, right? And he was running the show. And this was the time when there was a big push for Nissan, and there's, Nissan design. And then you had Mitsubishi there. Remember the whole Mitsubishi push? You had Scion at the time, this brand new brand that came out from Toyota. And there was like the customization and the artistry. They had like all these entrepreneurs, and that was sort of a cool era too. But like, you're right. The whole thing just sort of kind of bubbled up and bubbled over, and then there's like nothing. It's just like minivans and Miatas. It's boring.
The Miata thing has held on for a long time, but it's gotten long in the tooth, man. They can't do too much more with the Miata that we haven't seen, I don't think. I think it's time to retire that concept as a whole.
Yeah, and Toyota tried a couple of years ago with the new what's their new old vehicle that I'm thinking of? Yeah, I'm thinking of the Toyota Supra. They brought the Supra back, and I think they were trying and had big hopes for it. But again, it seemed like it kind of flopped.
Well, I don't know. There's nothing to stand for anymore. I mean, Volvo sort of staked out safety for a long time, and then, Mercedes is luxury and Porsche is performance. And like, you've got these things that are sort of standards. And then it seemed as though Mazda, Honda, Nissan, Toyota all dropped into a safe bet. And they just sort of lost all of their flavor. And I can't imagine why. I mean, the people that followed those, like the Celica Supra people were diehard for that. And the RX-7 people were diehard for it. And the 300Z, 280Z people were diehards for them. And it kind of feels like they turned their back on their base a little bit. And you're right. They became minivan soccer mom manufacturers. And it's like, they must financially have made it make sense. But for the enthusiast, you sort of sit back and go, what happened to the brand? Like, where'd it go? Because, they don't stand for anything anymore.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe these are like the rebuilding years because those big three companies, Toyota, Nissan, uh, wait, Toyota, Nissan, and Honda, they're right here in Southern California, or they were, right like a couple miles from each other. Honda is still there for all intents and purposes, but Toyota left town. They moved to Texas. Nissan moved to Tennessee. Uh, Mazda is here. Actually, a couple. Uh, I worked in the same office building. I was there. Then Mazda came in and took it over, and I met their CMO. And let's just say they're in transition. Like, uh, they, yeah. Um, but yeah, they're here. But yeah, it's sad. It's sad. You're right. I feel like in many ways they've abandoned their base and some of these really deep, narrow niches they had like a really good grip on. I think they just lost their grip.
I would love to see it come back. I even miss, dogs love trucks. Like it still, there was something in the campaign that was trying. There was a heartbeat there. And I feel like that's the big thing that I've seen walk out of so many of these car dealers is that, it was like they got safe and they got comfortable and they stopped playing to win. Like there was no reason to raw for them in the stands anymore. There's nothing to get excited about. I haven't seen anybody have a poster on their wall of one of those brands, and I can't tell you when, but that's not the way it used to be. It used to be that we were pulling, centerfold pictures of RX-7s out of Car and Driver and Road and Track and hanging them religiously over our beds. And that's back when the brands meant something and there was a reason to care. And I don't think now that there's much of a reason to care at all. I mean, it's how close is it? What kind of a deal can I get for it? They've become commodity products, and that's a shame.
Let's shift to EV. So, what do you think about like Ferrari doing an EV or Lambo doing an EV? Like, do you think that's
They have to. So yeah, of course, everybody's going to go that way. But it was funny. My son's friend knows that I'm a huge car guy, and my wife bought a Tesla. And I came to pick up my son one day, and he jokingly yelled over the thing, "Rev the engine for me!" And I was like, "Jackass," because he totally, like, he completely knew who I was in saying that. And as nice of a ride as it is, and as much as I enjoy, the simplicity of what it is. And certainly, yes, the power curve and the torque and all that. Yeah, great, great, great. But it's not driving. Like it's not, there's no, but then, I'm still a believer that everything should have a manual, and everybody I know thinks I'm out of my mind. They're like, but the others are faster. I'm like, I don't care. It doesn't matter. It's not about that for me. It's about moving through the gates of the gears. It's about downshifting through a corner. It's about, that's the joy of driving for me. So I get into a Tesla and I appreciate the power to weight ratio and I appreciate the smooth, torque curve, and I get all that. And I love, love, love how he has done his steering. Love it. But the rest of it, 80 miles an hour, 90 miles an hour in a Tesla is like, 90 miles an hour in a vacuum. Like there's no sound, there's no nothing. I don't know. It's just not fun.
I feel like it's early. I mean, I like Elon has done a lot of stupid things, but I like Elon and I'm glad that Elon exists. I think, you know, he's the exception. He's the anomaly. And he's someone who can, for whatever reason, he can change everything, like, just by doing whatever he does. I also feel like Tesla, that era, like we're in iPhone 1. Like this is the very first drop. And in some ways, yeah, there's more and more quick charge stations. And is it Ford that just did the deal with Tesla? I think it is. Ford just announced that, or Ford and Tesla announced this partnership where you can get your Ford now recharged at any Tesla recharging station. That's a big deal. I think probably GM is on that as well, following suit. And so, yeah, as soon as we get more of these charging stations, as soon as it's quicker and you don't have to wait 30 minutes to fill up your tank or whatever, it's going to be much more broadly adopted. But the other thing is, self-driving is coming and all these other things that we have no idea is coming. It's early, I think.
There was an old Robert Duvall movie. I don't even remember the name of it, but he had like an old Cutlass or something, and the whole movie was like he was the last guy that drove. It was back in like the Death Race 2000, end of the 60s, early 70s, cult, kind of thing you'd watch on like UV, TV 45 at 2 in the morning or whatever. But this whole thing was about him being the only guy that had like a gasoline engine anymore. And he rides off in the sunset and like the police can't chase him or whatever because he's in a car that actually can go wherever he wants to go. And I kind of feel like the older I get, the more like the closer to that character I become, because I don't want my car to self-drive. Like I get the appeal, but that to me is like riding a train. Like if I wanted to ride a train or take a plane, I would. No, if I'm going to drive, like I actually want to drive. So I'm curious to see. I heard something in the wind the other day about a group that did an EV with a clutch. And I'm kind of interested to see how that kind of thing comes along, if they add sound to things, but it's minimal sound, or if they, do some sort of adaptation on it. I'm super curious to see where that technology goes.
How about Ferrari's stance? Let's talk about that as from a brand standpoint. The way that they handle their customer service. Basically, you walk into a Ferrari dealership, you can't buy a Ferrari. Or you can't walk out without donating to the race team, or, once you buy a Ferrari, there's strict rules against mods and different customizations. And what is your, is that the right brand stance for a brand like that?
I wish I had more insight on that to give than I do. I think the joy of Ferrari is in the exquisite detail that they provide in the sheet metal, like the feel and the choices of the materials and the history and the part of it that you are in. I think those restrictive behaviors probably make a lot more sense in the boardroom than they do in actual real world experience. I mean, personally, if I'm going to spend that kind of money on a vehicle, I don't want to be cajoled into giving dollars to other things that support the Ferrari brand but don't actually directly influence me. So that's probably just a personal stance on it. But my vision for that brand has always been, sort of as an aspirational thing and something to be enjoyed. I've driven a few and I really enjoy them. But I don't know that I would want to be the first owner of any Ferrari. I think I'm probably a very comfortable second or third owner guy.
There is something to putting up high walls, right? Putting up barriers. And, that's sort of a brand positioning, brand strategy decision. And I remember I saw something like with Jay Leno, who's a big car guy. And Jay said, I will never, ever own a Ferrari. And the reason for that is kind of what we're talking about. Like they put such high walls up and put such restrictions on it. He's just like, forget you, I'll buy a McLaren, I'll buy a Bugatti. I don't need you, Ferrari. But there is something to be said to create scarcity, create exclusivity. It's something every brand marketer should be thinking about as a strategy, right? And so I don't think I think it's difficult, right? But like Ferrari's doing something right. And by having all these really strict rules and basically creating control, the brand still has control over its people to some extent, which is rare, right? Because, you and I know that brands don't have control. In fact, when brands give up control, it's when the magic happens. But yet Ferrari has been able to navigate that road and do it pretty well. Of course, they're also not selling Ferraris like Corollas, right? You didn't ask me what my dream car is.
Oh, I was going to. I just hadn't gotten a chance. What is your dream car?
Mine's the LaFerrari.
Ah, okay.
I sort of love that California Ferrari, that LaFerrari, that look. To not be able to mod it out or do anything like that, change the paint color, for example, if I wanted to. Those restrictions are difficult, but at the same time, I get it. Like if I were to buy a Ferrari, I would think of it kind of like an art piece. Like I would buy it and I would rub it with a diaper, and keep it. I'm thinking of like that Ferris Bueller like garage. How I just keep it in that garage and drive it maybe on Sundays or something to Cars and Coffee, you know.
Yeah, exactly. I think when you put in the order for the Ferrari is when you call your decorator and say, I need that indoor garage now. Like I need you to come and, take the living room out. And instead I need you to erect glass walls so that I can see it from the dining room. And yeah, I think you're right. I think Ferrari is a big part of their heritage is the aesthetic of the combination of pieces. I mean, the design of the sheet metal is it's just first in its class. It always has been. And they're absolutely, I mean, and that's what drew me to the whole Pininfarina thing was, watching some of those designs come to life and seeing who picked them up, falling in love even all the way down the line to the pocket Ferrari, the X19, right? But those attention, the attention to those details was always so well done and so well thought through. And most companies don't even think at that level, let alone execute on it, let alone then force people to maintain it once it's been executed upon. So yeah, I think your point is well made. They have the heritage to be able to pull it off, and they're successfully doing it.
Let's stay on brand for a second. So, what is a brand? You think? Let's define what brand is to you.
Oh, okay. What's a brand? In my opinion, the brand is the reputation that precedes the company. It is the set of expectations that arrives. And I use James Bond a lot on the TikTok videos that I do as an example of this, right? James Bond is James Bond. It doesn't matter who the character is that's playing it. It's always the same, right? It's country first. It's always capable in any situation. It's good looking, physically fit, shaken, not stirred. Like these are the things about that brand. And as such, and it went all the way back to Dr. No, your reputation has preceded you, Mr. Bond. Well, I think that that's really an excellent way to sort of frame what is brand. Brand is that you already had an expectation of what you were going to get before the brand entered the equation. And that means that it occupied brain space in a way that was already clearly defined and concrete. Companies would cut off their left arm to be able to achieve that. And while there's examples of it all around them, what strikes me as odd is how voraciously they fight not to be able to do that by constantly changing tack or by constantly thinking it's about price or by constantly chasing innovation or change, rather than understanding that these brands that have been able to achieve this level of success understand that the reputation is what drives that expectation, and really sticking to it and honoring it. I think that's where the strength of those companies comes from.
Yeah, it's really well said. And I would add, and also thinking that they can change the logo and that has anything to do with brand.
Yeah. It was funny. The word branding now is the new one that's getting tossed about. And it's not any surprise when you consider that there's branding and marketing and advertising and this and this and this, right? It used to be that there were fewer words, fewer choices. But I found it really interesting that when I talk to any client now about branding, they think it means logo and identity. They immediately pivot to, well, you must mean color palette and mark and, font choice. And I'm like, that has nothing to do with brand, the way that I'm thinking about it. But I haven't found that there are a lot of leadership teams, certainly not marketing leaders, definitely not CEOs, who truly understand what brand is all about anymore. I think we lost that somewhere along the way, and I'm not exactly sure how or why.
Yeah, I would agree. Generally speaking, that seems to be true. At the same time, there are some shining examples, some people who are doing it well. I can think of, like Airbnb, during the pandemic really had to pivot, and Joe Gebbia and, those guys, I think really did a good job of staying true to the brand. I think about brands like Patagonia, even though they're having some trouble with, international manufacturing and some contradictions there. Patagonia has stayed the course. And speaking of TikTok, I see some brands, even like McDonald's, that I kind of hate, but love to hate. They're doing such a good job sometimes at sort of like this content strategy. I think they're doing a good job. Before we dive into the brands that are doing well, let's talk a little bit about your TikTok strategy, because you've gotten some traction on TikTok. And And so I want you to talk about like what you've been doing, how you decided to do it. What's your strategy? What's the secret to your success? Break it down.
So I did it because I was dared to do it. Basically, yeah. So a guy, Tom, that is about 10 years my senior and a contemporary and has already, made his fortune and done his thing, called me one day and said, "You should be on TikTok." And I said, "No, hard no." I have no interest in being on TikTok. What in the world? Like, I won't let my kids on TikTok. Why in the world would I be on TikTok? And he said, "Well, tell me why." And I said, "Well, everything that I see is, kids shaking their ass and, people being drunk and falling down. Like, why do I want to be a part of that?" He said, "Yeah." He said, that's what everybody thinks it is." He said, "But if you look underneath it, there's a totally different level to that. That's all about an education base." And still I remained skeptical, and he just kept after me and kept after me. Well, finally, he invited somebody who had been very successful on TikTok to come to a presentation. And he was doing basically a 5-hour, get together over it. That's not what got my attention. What caught my attention were the other businesses that he invited who not only came, but came with a fleet of people. So we were talking $35 million to $75 million brands that were sitting in the room that had 5, 6, 7 people at a table. And so I was like, all right, well, I'll go and I'll see what this is about. And while I was there, some of the examples that this gentleman was showing were like a guy who was unpacking a turbo set for his truck who had 1 million followers. And he goes, "This guy has no lighting, no camera, no dialogue, no nothing. He's unboxing like a thing you strap on to your F-150. He's got 1 million plus followers. What's he doing?" And he was having a hard time articulating what it was, but it became very clear that there was a mini mentorship, mini education platform, sort of like microdosing education was sort of how I thought about it in my head, right? It was like, if I'm really in love with how to make Star Wars spaceships out of balsa wood, there's 100 hours, 1,000 hours of how to do that on TikTok. And I can go and just watch that commercial free. Just be like, I want to learn how to do the lasers now, and I want to learn how to do the engines or the lighting rig or whatever. And like, I can totally dive into that. And that's what caught my attention on it. And so I went back, and as I was leaving, Tom pulled me aside and was like, "I want you to look back at the room." He said, "None of these people is going to do it." He said, "All these people brought all these people, and they're going to sit here and they're going to listen. They're going to ask their questions, and they're going to eat the lunch, and then they're going to go and they're not going to do anything with it. I want you to be the one guy that does. Like, do something." And he basically challenged me to go out and try it. And so that kind of grated on me. Boy, did he know his target. So it sat there grating on me for days. And finally, I went out and I made a video, and I got like 300 views. And I got irritated. I was like, "I'm more interesting than 300 views." I was like, "That sucks. Come on, do better than that." So I went on and I did another one. Well, that one got 1,000. And then the next one got 5,000. And the next one got 15. And then 30. And then the next thing you know, I had one that had 2.5 million. So it was like, oh, okay. And about that time, people started calling and saying, "Can you be on my television show? Can you be on my podcast? Would you, like to work with me? Could you work with our company?" And suddenly everything became inbound very quickly. And so that's how I got involved in it. And it was really a surprise because I went from having 100 followers, I guess, just before Thanksgiving of last year to this morning, I'm like 89,000 or something. So in just 6-7 months, it's been a pretty big turnaround. So I've been really, really surprised, and a tremendous interest in business that has come from it. I really have been surprised by it.
But, it's like everything and nothing has changed. It's like, so the platform is different and it's microdosing, but it's the same content strategy that you and I know. It's like you create this sort of lean in experience, whether it's for 15 or 30 seconds, or it's for like what I've been doing on YouTube for, 3 minutes to 30 minutes. It's the same story, just, a little different platform.
Yeah, so that's been really interesting. You asked me a minute ago what was my strategy on developing content, and the answer is I just explained what I think people need to know that they don't know. They are not scripted. They are not structured. They are in some cases ridiculed for being quote unquote too long, which cracks me up that a 2-minute video is too long. I'm like, okay. But,
well, and they've just added the ability to do 10-minute, right?
right. What? Yeah. So, but I think it's been really interesting to play with it because the feedback that I get is I've learned more from this than I did from my college courses, or, this makes more sense than any boss that I ever had, or whatever. Like, that's the consistent feedback that I get is you're just telling it in a way that I can understand, like the James Bond analogy. I'm giving it to them in a way that they can say, oh, I get how that works. And I think that's the piece that's been missing from it, right? Our industry is so bad about obfuscation. We have all of this vocabulary and we talk about it in terms of how it relates to things. Listen to anybody try to describe SEO, SEM's relationship to the building of brand as it relates to, and, hell, people in the business can hardly follow it, let alone the person who's hired you to do it. So if you can't get the concept across in a way that meaningfully sits with the person who's heard it, then really, why did you bother speaking? So I guess the whole thrust of this is let's make marketing something that you can actually use. And that's, I've never really quoted it that way, but I guess if you ask, that's how I would sort of think about it is I'm trying to give it in bite-sized pieces that you can put together and that makes some kind of sense.
Yeah, it reminds me of two things. One, I read this thing on Einstein where he said, if you can't explain technical, difficult principles, simply like a 5-year-old or 8-year-old can understand it, then you don't understand it very well. So I think to your credit, being able to put it into bite-sized pieces not only shows your expertise, but also gives it in a palatable way that people of all experience levels can consume it. So if you're brand new to marketing and you look at your TikTok, you get it. If you're an experienced marketer, you get it because you're saying it very concisely. The other thing is this Mark Twain quote too. It's like, I think Mark Twain said something like, and I'm paraphrasing, it's a lot easier to write a long story than a short story, even though there's less words. And it's like writing a short story concisely, like to the point with fewer words succinctly. That's much more difficult than just rambling on for an hour. And so there's a little bit of an art form to it, I would think, that as you time it out and think about the words you're going to say, you have to be very selective, but you got to get right to it. And that's an art form.
Yeah, without a doubt. I think about it like describing building a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Number one, you have to know the subject well enough. Like if you were describing to someone how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, it wouldn't matter where they interrupted you. You could pick it right back up, right? Because you know the subject backward and forward. Oh, you want to talk about bread? Fine, we'll talk about bread. Oh, you want to talk about peanut butter types? Yeah, okay, that's not going to throw me. So I think that's the first part, is really kind of understanding it and knowing it. And then the second is just not making it hard. Like nobody would describe making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich with like 4-syllable words, right? You wouldn't sit there and say, well, the relationship of the jelly to the peanut, like you wouldn't talk about it that way. You'd be like, I smear it like this and then I smear it like that and I stick the pieces together. And at the end of it, people get it. And I think that's the piece that tends to get lost is we're so busy as people trying to say what we want to say that we're not always thinking about whether the person listening is actually hearing what we're intending to get across.
So I'm just curious what popped off. So you said, you had some at 1,000 views and you had some go to a couple million. Do you think that's a function of just stacking? Like, just the consistency in doing it is what led you to this sort of snowball effect? Or have you seen themes pop off?
Yeah, definitely. So the ones that got the most response were the ones that were the hottest topics. When I made a comment on Bud Light's turning their back on their base, that was 2.5 million, right? And then, it was, how dare you? They're brilliant and they knew, and the stock is going to bounce back next week. And it devolved very quickly into the left side. I'm sorry, I don't mean that to be left side, right side. Side A, side B. It just became like we chose camps and all of a sudden it became slinging rocks at each other. And the next thing you know, it was 2.5 million. The ones that get the greatest traction, however, in non-purposely chosen hot topic subjects are the ones that tell a story. So, the one that I tell about 3 different ways to sell a pen was like 1 million views. And all it was saying, here's how you do it when you're a commodity, and here's how you do it when you sort of get it, and here's how you do it when you get it. And it was just me riffing on a pen,
Let's recreate that right now. Can you recreate that for us? I'd love to see it.
The notion was, if you're a commodity product and you're a pen maker, there's nothing special about you, right? And you tend to think that your innovation or your solution is special. So you're like, wow, look at that cap. Our pen is better than any other pen because of this cap, or because we have 54 ink colors and everybody else has 52, or because we make a bajillion of them a year worth 32 cents instead of 39 cents. And like 90% of companies really believe that crap. Like they think that stuff matters, and it doesn't. A pen's a pen's a pen. You get a pen because you need to write something down. Like that's the whole thing. So then the next level up is like somebody that says, hey, our pen will write upside down. So we went and we spoke with contractors, and contractors are constantly looking up and trying to make notes. And it really ticks them off when their pen doesn't write because the ink flows backwards down off the ball and it won't write. And so we've created something that's constantly under pressure, and therefore we do that. And so now you've elevated this thing that's, 36 cents of plastic or whatever, and you've now given it a bigger purpose, right? A bigger, broader purpose. And then the groups that really, really get it are the ones that understand that it's the frustration that the pen didn't work at all in the first place. They're the ones. So they're the ones that show people breaking pens, throwing clipboards, etc. And then they just say, never again, right? And that's brand. And you could go beyond that. You could go to what happens when you don't have a pen. You could go to, whatever. But just being able to like say, these are it's the same pen, like nothing changed. It's the same pen. It's how we wrapped that thing. And I think right now the story to watch with that is Liquid Death, which if I could get a foam finger with Liquid Death and stand out on the street doing this, showing my support for them, I would. But they also cheated. They have 2 people from, Saatchi or whatever on their leadership team. So they don't have to fight the same fight the rest of us do to get it to happen. But they took water and put it in a can and wrapped a story around it, around murdering your thirst, and then supported it with this idea that, we're not using plastic and the rest of it, which was altruistic and phenomenal and supportive and green and all the magical, wonderful words that we want to take. But that doesn't change the fact that they put water in a can. And that water in a can is not innovative and it's not unique. And no offense to them, but the flavors aren't different. And the things that, that's not what did it. What did it is they came out, and the thing that they just did, I shouldn't have even referenced it because now it's just fallen off, but that they were doing for like colonoscopy or whatever it was that they were just doing, where they had the nude and the digitized out and the whole thing. It was about doing enemas with you, with your at-home enema kit or whatever. It was beautifully done. Phenomenal awareness thing, fun, playful, goofy, and in no way unique, except that no other bottled water company in the world would do it. And if you think back historically to the group that used to sit on high was Evian with their whole pure thing. You remember it was like the tub filled with Evian and pouring the bottle in with the fish and the whole thing. This was like the angel and devil thing, right? On the one hand, you had Evian, which was so pure as to, have fallen from the gods. And then here comes Liquid Death, which is like, the older brother with the drug habit, right? That comes along and is like, I'm going to disrupt the hell out of everything. And both work. And still businesses look and say, brand has nothing to do with it. And I can't, it just boggles the mind. Here are groups that are getting $700 million valuations off of a story that they told. It's phenomenal stuff.
Yeah. Let's stay on that for a second. I love that theme. So we sort of define what a brand is, and I'm totally there with you that the brand, of course, you have to walk the talk, but the brand really lives in the hearts and the minds of the people who consume the product or experience your product, and they get to tell you what their experience is, and hopefully your values, your marketing campaign aligns with their expectations and their experience. But even if it doesn't completely align, that's wonderful too. Sometimes a brand can take off in different directions that you don't expect. But let's talk about brand marketing versus direct marketing, or brand marketing versus advertising. How do you see them different? Brand marketing versus paid marketing.
Well, okay, so brand marketing is paid marketing. How are you defining the other? As like earned owned?
To me, there's brand marketing, and then there's advertising, or brand marketing and direct marketing. And to me, branding is kind of what we've described as telling stories and creating experiences, creating a shorthand for people to understand what the brand should stand for. Contrast that with advertising, direct marketing, which is paid. So, you create an ad spot, and you're defining a target, and you put some money behind it, and then you hope that it hits that target. To me, there's two different paths, and branding is sort of a pull lever, and advertising is sort of a push, where you're trying to, push people into a funnel or get them to jump through a hoop, giving them incentives like when back to school happens, you'll start hearing all these ads for, hey, kids' clothes are on sale, and for this week only, it's 50% off. So come get it. And like this dinner bell is ringing in the background, and it's for a limited time. Or maybe it's fear mongering with the mattress companies, and they say, "Hey, it's been about 8 years since you bought your last mattress. Your mattress is probably infested with bugs, and it's probably full of dead skin, and it's probably full of your sweat. So it's about time to come get your new mattress." Right? That's not branding. That's more like direct marketing.
To me, I feel like they've done some really well. Sorry for my hesitation. The reason I'm doing that is because I feel like there are multiple layers and multiple directions of what you've just said, and we kind of need to pull them apart for a second. The first one is marketing. Different types of marketing work to different types of people. So for, I'm going to use Geico for a second because it's a pretty simple one from the outside. And I'm paraphrasing, so somebody's going to watch this from Geico and send me a message and be like, "You're completely wrong." The 15% or more in 15 minutes or less thing, right? This was really about honoring the individual. And so it was, look, your time is worth money, and we're going to snap these Legos together, right? Like, you're going to give us this little bit of time, and we're going to give you this thing that you value, and therefore your time equals money. It's not just savings, it's an honoring of the individual. We put those together. Great. Okay, well, that goes on, except not enough people came, right? So then they go back and they do some more research, and they're like, "Well, why aren't you coming?" "Well, it's hard. I'm afraid it's going to be hard. I don't know. It's like, I don't want to do it. I see the benefit. I see the value, but it's like I'm sitting on a nail that's not that far out of the board. So it doesn't hurt enough for me to get up." So then they do this whole thing. Well, it's not hard. It's so easy. A caveman can do it, right? So that group of people needed to hear that message a different way. But I want you to contrast those two stories now with the stack of money that has eyeballs on top of it. This is about as no frills as it gets. This is, if you bundle, you're going to save money. Okay. This is the coupon getter. This is don't tell me a story. I don't want to hear the story, whatever. So when I think about those things that you're talking about, is the person that psychographically responds to a story going to truly be incentivized by the discount if everybody's giving a discount? I say at that point, they all become parody, and no, there's no benefit to running the ad because everybody knows that back to school equals a deal. And therefore, when they go to the store, they're either going to get the deal, or there's going to be a match, or there's going to be something else as an opportunity. At that point, I'm not just going to change brands if I'm brand loyal simply because there's a discount that's going on. If that's the case, I'm not in fact brand loyal in the first place. I'm actually that cost coupon person who is not brand loyal to anybody, but is loyal only to the benefit that they can get. So when you say that thing about how do I view marketing, it isn't as simple as what is a difference in my mind between what is an advertising effort or what is a marketing effort or what is a branding effort. I'm also thinking about the psychographic profile of how do I make a decision? When do I make a decision? And under what circumstances do I make a decision? If I am loyal to Porsche, which I kind of am, then it wouldn't matter. I'm not going to be more or less inclined to buy a Porsche simply because they were on sale, which, by the way, they don't do, because I'm loyal to the brand. And just because, say, BMW comes along, a brand that I don't particularly like, and they made their thing less, I'm not going to swap out my love of Porsche for a BMW simply because I can get one, or I can get one cheaper, or I can get one now when there's a line out the door at Porsche and I'd have to wait for it. Harley Davidson proved that same fact when they had a 3-year waiting list. So I think we're really talking about different subsets of how people choose as a part of that, as much as the need for marketing, versus the rest of it. I see that brand advertising as maintaining a relationship is a poor word, but maintaining visibility and awareness and constantly being a part of the consideration set with consumers, much more than I see it as getting them into a funnel. It's helping them know how they're making a choice. They're going to make a choice anyway. I'm just telling them what I'm standing for so that they can do it. The rest of it to me is like, for those of you who aren't influenced by brand the same way, or who are influenced but just need that little extra push to get you in the door, now we're dropping down a level and we're doing this announcing a sale, or we're, Father's Day thing, or whatever. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, and it's a complex subject, right? With many layers, like you said. I guess I'm getting at maybe distilling some advice for people who are working on their own brand or maybe something new. I mean, usually the first order of operations when you start something new is you have an awareness problem. Like no one even knows that you exist. And so what do you do first? Do you do a brand campaign where you're talking about your values, what you stand for, what people, how people should experience your product? Or should you, aim for the bullseye and get people in the doors, or get people to incentivize them in some way to get to know you quicker by making a purchase or giving it to them for free? I can think of a lot of these new products and services, especially online products, maybe a SaaS product. It's like, test drive this for 30 days for free. Don't even put it in your credit card, and you can try it out, test drive it, see if you like it. That's a way to get people hands-on without a commitment. But like, what's your take on that? What's the order of operations?
I think you've given a really interesting dynamic here, and I'd love to add to that. You've described two sides of the thing. Do we talk about ourselves and the things that we value, or do we do something that's an offer you can't refuse? I actually think that there's a third thing in the middle that most businesses don't think to do, and that is, let me show you how well I understand your situation and how I can help you make it better. Because before I try to tell you, come in and get my pen because you can get it at a discount, and then learn about the pen and then come to love the pen, which is, I'm doing this strictly out of a cost or need base, or I'm sitting and talking about myself, which I personally think works as well in marketing as it does at a cocktail party. I think the thing in the middle is, nobody cares, right? They only care about the problem that they have and if they can get a solution. And I've done an interesting sort of psych test on this in business development over the last 2 years. I was just curious. No one ever asks about our agency, ever. It's kind of funny. Like, I used to have a thing years ago with our first agency where we would take the portfolio, and the whole thing was not to open it. The whole thing was, can you sell the job without opening the portfolio? And we would do it 90% of the time. They would never ask about the competitor's work. They never wanted to see the case study. They did the entire thing based on the two things: the chemistry test of the individuals sitting across the table from each other, number one, and number two, and more importantly, how well did you understand my problem, and how clearly were you able to articulate a way that you would get me from it? I believe brands stand for one of two things. You either make something possible or you make something go away. I think when you boil everything off, it's just that simple. So the faster you're able to say, see how well I understand that your boss won't leave you alone because you can't get your TPS reports done. Our software is a thing that makes TPS reports take a third of the time. Then the reaction is, I've been trying to get my TPS reports out of my hair so that I can get my boss off my back. Thank you. I'm interested. Not curious at that point about what it costs. Not curious at that point about your history. Don't care about your team. Don't want to know about the rest of it. My boss is bugging me, and I want my boss to go away. Or I want to achieve something. I always wanted to look like Arnold Schwarzenegger, and I've tried every program out in the world, and this one actually seems to work. Well, I'm going to give it a chance because it actually seems to work. Like, the way we make decisions is way simpler than that. So I think that these far afield ones actually leave them out. I think it's meeting in the middle, and then you don't have to worry so much about price or other things because you're showing how well you get them. And that's what most businesses never do well.
Yeah, that's a super good point. Very good point. The psychographic part of it, I think, is probably undervalued and overlooked quite a bit. You're right. The reason we make decisions is huge, right? Let's go back to Ferrari. Like, am I buying a Ferrari because I'm a purist and I want a piece of art in my garage? Or am I buying it because of the way it makes me feel, or it brings me back to, a time, or flash forwards a time, or it's a status symbol? It's like, am I buying it because it's going to make me look as good or better as my neighbor? There's so many different reasons why people buy, and you could really nail it or completely miss the mark, depending on how you go about it. Which kind of brings me back to, let's go back to the Budweiser fiasco. What happened there?
In its simplest term, they turned their back on their base. Budweiser is the alcoholic version of Dunkin'. Like, America runs on Budweiser products, right? And that's been their base forever. Blue collar Americana, Jill and Jane backyard barbecue. And absolutely, and that base has been loyal to them from the time that they were buying it off of the back of a cart that was horse drawn. Like, I used to work on AB, and that community they're not off buying Miller because Miller's 30 cents less a bottle. Like, they're AB people, and the Miller people are Miller people, and that's how it is. And so when they did this thing, and I'm sure internally the idea was, by adding this group, we will, be awarded for being altruistic, and we will, have recognized a new group, and we will have made a bigger, broader market. But in reality, what they did was they said, this mass of humanity that has supported us forever and clearly feels at least within a zone of these things as values, we didn't consult you, and we didn't really take you into consideration. And we thought we could sell a few more boxes by doing this. And there we go. And the response has been quite loud. And I don't know that they're ever going to win it. I mean, consumers have a tremendously short attention span. Politics has proven that. So eventually some will wander back into it. But this is a hot topic, and people got really upset about it. And I think they're going to stay that way. So some people that responded back were like, never again. Like, Miller's been waiting for my business for all of my life, and they just earned it. Or, I'm going to go to Dos Equis, or I'm going to go to Corona, or I'm going to do whatever. And like, they're mad about it, like really mad about it.
Yeah. Well, this is a polarizing topic, but let's go down a layer and talk about brand strategy, because I think fundamentally, if I was going to, sit behind the first person goggles of the CMO who made that decision, and maybe even bring it back to cars, but like, part of the thinking could be, hey, Bill, we already have that base. They're our base. They're going to stand in line, whether it's raining. We could change the label and they'd come out. It doesn't matter. Like, we've already got those people. So I'm just sort of playing the other side of the coin. Now we have this opportunity to go out to this whole new subset of people, and maybe let's change the frame a little bit and aim back on cars. So here we are, like luxury brands like Maserati or Lamborghini or Porsche or even Ferrari creating an SUV. Okay, this is a little off-brand, right? Because typically they're creating supercars, and now these brands are creating SUVs. Is this the right decision to make? And what advice can we give to marketers who are thinking about doing this in their market, whether it's like they're an attorney or they have an agency or a plumbing business, whatever their business is? Like, they've already got their base dialed. They're coming to them without having to do much. They could read the dictionary and people are applauding. But like, so should they pivot and try to and widen their lane? And what's the cautionary tale here?
Well, first off, I don't think any one person, myself included, should be, not to steal Elvis Presley's line, but I'm just an entertainer, right? Like my opinion doesn't count. These leadership teams need to do what's right for their business and their brand. So I am in no position to sit down and suggest a golden rule for anybody on anything. What I think could be learned from the lesson on this strategy was they made an assumption that the base wouldn't care. And I think that's where they made their mistake from a strategic standpoint. They didn't create a new offshoot brand that could be owned by this group. Keep in mind that this new group of people was already drinking their product. The question was, how much do we tuck it under something that we're going to broadcast and announce to the world? And when it wasn't unique, or it stepped too far out of line, and I'll use Volkswagen's Phaeton as a great example. They tried to jump the shark over into Audi territory, and they couldn't do it, and that resounded with a big thud on the other side, because Volkswagen is supposed to be fun and playful and energetic and interesting and all the rest of it, and all of a sudden they tried to put a pinky up and talk about this is our luxury car, and everybody was like, luxury, you're Volkswagen, like knock it off. So I think the cautionary tale is to assume that a base won't leave. I also think you really need to ask the question, why are you doing it? Are you doing it because you actually believe it, or are you doing it because you think you can put more revenue at the bottom line? And I think that's what really ticked people off. If I'm just making a good guess from the sidelines, I think that's what really ticked people off about the AB thing was it was like it wasn't wholesome. It was like, we're just going to slap this on, and then it's going to kind of be more money, and everybody is going to be happy, and it's going to be great. Now, maybe the CMO's point of view is different. I mean, I don't know her. I've never had a conversation with the woman. I have absolutely no idea what her point of view is, nor do I understand what the political pressure was on her to perform. So when you take all those things into consideration, she may very well have been squeezed into a lane that said, look, go find me a way to raise, profit by 4% this quarter or whatever. And she was like, well, here's a way that we can go get a group of people that's already shown interest in the brand, and we can honor them and respect them and lift the water level. So lots there to unpack. Yeah, but I wouldn't feel comfortable making a blanket statement for anything. I think each brand has to make a decision about what's right for them and what they stand for and why they stand for it. And then they need to make their strategic decisions based out of that.
Yeah. So let me ask it another way, or maybe ask it at 15 degrees to the right. So what if a group of people are putting up their hands and saying, we want this? Again, I'm kind of going back to the supercar SUV. I'm seeing more. I saw a Rolls Royce on the road the other day. I was like, oh, Rolls Royce makes an SUV? Awesome.
So does Lamborghini, and I can't for the life of me understand why. I truly can't.
Now, I have firsthand experience. So I drove the Lamborghini Urus. It is amazing. Amazing. Oh, it's tremendous, Bill. Like it's not an SUV, but it's an SUV. Like that car is beefy and guttural, and that thing has guts, and it's got like sand mode, snow mode, track mode. Like it's a badass car. Like, if you think some soccer mom's going to drive, it's like, no, like this soccer dad wants to drive it. It is a beast, fun car to drive. But, so what if, whatever brand or whatever, product or service you've got this base, everything's going great. And then you have a little group of people over here raising their hand and saying, hey, we want this product, feature, or benefit. Will you create it for us? How do we respond to that? Should a brand hop to it and say, okay, we'll make that for you? Or what's some best practices here?
Not in my opinion. I think this is sort of the be careful how much you react scenario, right? This is sort of Seinfeld's, don't give the audience what they want, give them what they fell in love with. I think, again, every brand has to make this decision for themselves, and how they do it, I think, is at the end of the day. Porsche did a nice job of creating a couple of SUV solutions that sort of bridged the performance. Like there's enough of a look difference, there's enough of a performance difference that it doesn't just feel like, oh, us too. And from what you've described, the Lamborghini does the same thing. If Ferrari comes out with one, I'm officially going on strike. But I think then the question becomes, well, what are you going to do with it? How is it unique? Why is it unique? I can't remember what the Mercedes one is that looks like a stack of Legos, but it's super boxy and it's super different. Yeah. And, that is a unique experience, right? And what you've described in terms of what Lamborghini was doing sounds as though it's not just another SUV. And I think that's really the big point, is if these high-end or marginal groups decide to respond to the request of a community like that, then the solution should be as special as the thing that they originally fell in love with, or it's going to lose its value. I always kind of chuckle at Rolls-Royce and Bentley. If you ever look at their resale value after 5 years, like the depreciation on the car from the public's opinion is so dramatic that it makes you wonder why anybody would pay the price. Why would I buy a $300,000 car if, it's worth $70,000 5 years later? Like that just doesn't make any sense to me at all. So I think it really comes down to, if you're going to do it, what's going to make it as unique and special as the original?
And maybe let's go one more example. So out here on the West, we have In-N-Out Burger, which is like, the place everyone goes for fresh ingredients. It's, the fast food choice. And there's like 5 things on the menu. And you think, man, why can't you we'd love some chicken nuggets or, and the answer is no, you can't have the chicken nuggets. We have burgers. There's some secret things on the menu you can order. So again, why shouldn't, if a lot of people are clamoring for it, why shouldn't a brand or a company change to what the people are asking for?
Oh, see, now I like it asked that way because it gives me a different perspective on it. In that instance, the answer is because that's a race to commodity. And that's exactly why I would do that. The beautiful thing about the In-N-Out Burger experience is that you only have 6 choices or whatever it is. That's what makes it special. If they all of a sudden added chicken McNuggets, then they're all of a sudden a chicken McNugget competitor. And now all of a sudden they've lowered their value against McDonald's or the rest. If you're going to come out and hold your space, then hold it. And if that's what Five Guys is kind of like that, right? Like in Five Guys, you get these things and that's what you do. And, we make our French fries this way and we cut them by hand and we do this and this and this. And that's the experience that you get here. And I think the minute that they just start adding for the sake of adding, then all they're really doing is lowering themselves to compete with lesser competitors.
Okay. So now I just give me another example. Let's look at Facebook. Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg are notorious for stealing ideas from other platforms like Snapchat, this functionality. Basically, if your social network has a cool functionality, Facebook will steal it and implement it into Instagram or whatever. So it's like, so that seems to be working for Facebook. However, to your point, it seems to also be eroding their power, or maybe their traction. But talk about that for a second. Why would a brand like Facebook just outright copy other platforms? Is that working for them?
That question needs to come back and ask another thing. Is social media trying to find a status quo? And I think that's the really interesting thing. Right now, if you want microdose like quick hit, you go to TikTok. If you want longer education base, you go to YouTube. If you want, you know what I mean? Like,
well, wait a second, Bill, because
they're kind of staking out these territories.
Right. But each one is also like, so TikTok has been eating YouTube's lunch for a while. So in answer to that, YouTube has come out with YouTube Shorts, which is their answer to the TikToks, right? Instagram, right? TikTok was eating Instagram's lunch. And so their answer to that has been stories and reels. So now they're all sort of trying to compete in different ecosystems, but with the same kind of functionality. Is that the right decision for those platforms to sort of, have an answer for what the other one's done?
And see, that's where I see it as a little different because I'm wondering if these social platforms are kind of like television stations that are all coming down to a similar solution experience. If everybody understands that there's a value for a short form and a long form, and everybody ultimately provides short and long form, notice TikTok started adding 10 minutes. Right. So TikTok is going the other way. YouTube and Insta are coming down. Right. So I'm wondering if it's a race to status quo where everybody suddenly like is doing and using the same thing, at which point you'll have then, people buying each other up and like creating singular incidents. I see that as a little different than a restaurant or an automotive company that says, we want to own this thing. Like, Volvo doesn't actually own safety. Mercedes does, and it has from the beginning. If you know anything about cars, you know anything about the investment in engineering and innovation and the rest, Mercedes has it all over Volvo. But they wanted luxury, so they eked out luxury. Volvo was all about safety, and that 3-point harness thing that they kind of have been riding the coattails of forever and ever and ever. That thing came and went, but they haven't pivoted and tried to go into performance or tried to go into luxury or tried to go into other things. They've stayed in the safety zone because it worked well for them. If any one of those brands started migrating over, they would simply lose their status. But it's a different kind of a choice and a tool than a social media platform. Anybody that is in the innovative tech space, I mean, Steve Jobs was famous for saying, good artists steal, or what is it? Great artists steal, good artists copy. He said, but you're not going to copy from me. I have lawyers against it. And it was like this really funny thing because he bought all of his tech rather than just copying it. He went to the originators whenever he could and he bought it outright and then just implemented it into his system. So I don't think that kind of innovation is unusual in the development of things, but I also think that they're slightly different arguments based on the kinds of solutions that they're providing to people.
Yeah, I think you're right. And the main key difference here is that none of those platforms actually make anything. They're facilitators. And I think about Spotify and YouTube going to battle. So we're doing a podcast here. YouTube has put a stake in the ground for podcasts. As you know this, if you go to youtube.com/podcasts, they're building out a whole podcast thing to compete with Spotify. But again, to your point, whether it's Spotify, YouTube, TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram, whatever the flavor of the month, they actually don't make anything. Neither does Google, right? Who owns, they're facilitators, and they're, I think, I had this conversation earlier, but it's like a reminder, you are not the consumer in this case. Actually, you are the product. You and I are the product. We are making their product for them. So yeah, maybe that's the key differences. They're facilitators.
I hadn't thought about it that way, but I think you're onto something with that because it's simply a tool in this instance. It's not a choice. It's the need to an end. Right? Like if I choose luxury or I choose performance or I choose safety, I'm choosing a particular thing that I want for myself. In this case, I'm choosing a set of functions just to be able to do the thing I want to do more. So I see them as slightly different, and I really like your way of looking at it. I would not have articulated it that way, but I will now because it's a really good way to do it.
Well, we're about out of time. Iris, thank you so much for your time. Maybe let's end on some parting words of advice for people who are building their brand.
Yeah. The number one thing that I can say is it's not about you. These are the four most important words in business. It's not about you. It never was. It never will be. You've got to understand why the person that's sitting in front of you bothered to sit in front of you. And the more you understand their situation and how you can change their emotional state for the better, the more value you're going to have to that audience group. And so few businesses really understand that. And that's why they're so hooked on innovation and pricing and promotions. So don't go down the path. Actually take the time to learn the audience. Don't make assumptions about it, and build everything that you're doing off of getting to know them and why.
I mean, we were just sitting back, chopping it up, reminiscing about the good old days and all that. Tracking my roots, where I came from and where I'm going. But like I say, man, always said it. It's not about the destination. Nope. It's all about the journey. Ain't nothing changed but the weather.